Campers of Reddit, what is the most paranormal event that has occurred while you were camping? Serious. I tend to spend a lot of time in abandoned towns with violent pasts and areas where the natives say skinwalkers are plentiful, but funny enough, my most terrifying paranormal experience came from a camping trip I took a solid 5 minutes away from my house at a close friend's family property. Now, to give a basic layout of the land, it's a fairly large area split by a steep hill in the middle with a pond on the bottom, a cabin resting at the midsection, and our camping fire area up top. I drove over there with my two good friends just before sunset, so we would have time to get a good fire going and make some food. Everything seemed to be going smoothly till about 45 minutes after sunset. By that point, we had thrown our first pallet onto the fire and we were pulling out some hot dogs and chips. We were getting a little rowdy and loud before I quickly shoved my hands over the mouths of my friends. I thought I had heard something down by the cabin, and my friends thought that they might have as well. As we whispered our suspicions, we started hearing a full-blown conversation coming from the area. I still can't say whether it was in English or any other language I know of today, but I could understand that these entities were angry. We sat there quietly, only becoming more nervous as the conversation seemed to escalate to yelling, getting more and more furious every second, before the most terrifying moment in my life occurred. Everything got silent for a moment, and we began to feel calm. As soon as we all made eye contact to give the "what the flurbo just happened" look to everyone around, we all flicked our heads to the pond. It wasn't more voices that attracted us, it wasn't a splash of anything of the sort. It was an absolutely bee-curdling scream of a woman that cut off sharply after about 2 seconds. By that point, we thought someone had to be there. So, not even caring that our fire was dying out, we all jumped into my car and flew down the rough dirt road to the cabin and pond. With flashlights out of every window and my high beams on, we searched for about 30 minutes before settling with the fact that we had found nothing. Defeated, I started making my way back up that dirt road to the fire so we could at least cook the rest of our food. And though it could almost be expected, I was shaken to the core when I heard the scream once more coming from the area. Our fire was that scream that could now only be described as a scream that one could only let out when they were about to meet their end. Never before have I slammed brake, gone into reverse and flown down a road so quickly in my life. By the time we made it to the gate, I looked back to where we just were, and the sight I held almost made me vomit. Our fire, left dying in the middle of a marsh with no possible fuel closer than 25 feet away from it, stood at least 10 feet tall and seemed to be growing in height. Not realizing that everyone else was looking as well, I got a tap on my shoulder from one of the two with the words that I wish I never heard coming from his mouth. Is there someone standing in front of the fire? Thank God that by that point, we managed to get the gate open, and I was able to lay the throttle down and drive the road out exactly 50 miles per hour faster than I normally do. This was an absolutely terrible experience for me. I haven't been there at night since, and I still have occasional night terrors relating to my experience even after a year and a half. This wasn't camping exactly, but I managed a resort in the Adirondack for several years. The place is old and rustic. It's miles from civilization and very peaceful. It was built in the 20s and had somewhat of a sordid past. It was built for a Canadian senator who would run rum down from Canada during Prohibition. We still had the underground locked safe room where he would store the booze, as well as hidden booze hiding areas underneath some of the cabins. Calvin Coolidge stayed at a camp across the pond during his presidency and would visit my camp, for the spirits I'm sure. Anyway, I met a girl and decided to sleep out under the stars on the camp's peninsula. Well, it started to rain. So I suggested we sleep on the screened-in porch of the boathouse, which I thought was a pretty good compromise. So after we were all set up, it was getting pretty late, about 1:30 a.m. or so. We were laying there, and I was all tossed-turned because I'd been asleep and woken up, so I have a hard time falling asleep after stuff like that. We'd lain there for about a half an hour or so when I hear the bathroom door open in the boathouse. It couldn't have been anything else but that door. I did all the maintenance on those old buildings, and oiling that particular door was on my work list for the next day. My first thought was my boss, the owner of the camp. She is notoriously nosy and has been known to spy on the staff in their staff quarters, so she was my first logical thought as to who made the noise. Why she would have been hiding out in the men's bathroom in the boathouse for over an hour is beyond my comprehension. I proceed to hear footsteps walking across the boathouse, down the 3 stairs onto the dance floor, and stopping right in front of the door to the screened-in porch. I lay there just waiting for the door to open and my boss to call my name. And as the minutes stretched out, I started praying that she would open the door, walk away, sneeze, dance the funky chicken, anything. Nothing. The rest of the night I stayed up. Stiff and straight as a poker in my sleeping bag. No receding footsteps, no door noises, no nothing. My girlfriend, the night, and the empty boathouse. The next morning, my girlfriend, she wasn't at the time, but she was the 4 years that followed, rolled over to me and immediately asked me about the footsteps the night before. She had also stayed up all night waiting for some other sound to explain those footsteps in the night and heard nothing. She was terrified. Never went into the boathouse again. I unfortunately had to go in the boathouse on a daily basis. Everything was cool during the day. At night, I had to turn all the lights in the camp off. This is something I've done every night for the past 3 years. However, ever after, there was always a sense of dread going in there, being alone in the dark in the boathouse. The worst part is that there is an enormous hanging bed in there in front of the fireplace. It was for the former camp owners to take naps on in the day, hung on chains, so that the bed can be lifted out of the way for entertaining guests in the evening. Every single night, that bed was swinging. 175 pounds bed, swinging on its chains in the dark of the boathouse. Until my last day at the camp, if I went in at night, that bed was swinging. This happened to me when I was little. I went camping with my older brother and my mom. I was about 7 or 8 and I went to bed around 10 in a sleeping bag inside my tent with both my mom and brother. Sometime during the night, I don't know when, I woke up somewhere in the middle of the woods still in my sleeping bag. I had no idea where I was or where my tent was. I screamed for my mom and I heard her calling back for me in panic, but she was easily 100 yards away or so. To this day, I have no idea how I ended up in the middle of the woods, still inside my sleeping bag. Gives me the chills. One of my college professors told us his story. He was camping in the Cordillera Mountains and had his own tent. He woke up in the middle of the night to find a woman with unkempt hair and torn and beat clothing crawling on all fours towards him. He screamed and woke up, it was a dream. When his friends rushed to his tent to see what was the matter, he told them about his dream, and a few of them became visibly uncomfortable, with all the color draining from their faces. They insisted that they leave camp as soon as the sun came up. It was only after they had left the mountains that his friends told him that several of them had shared similar dreams. Except in their dreams, they saw a woman crawling into my professor's tent. Few years ago, I was camping in the Everglades in Florida with a few friends. We all had gone into our separate tents and were starting to fall asleep. The area was pretty noisy with bugs, crickets, birds, etc. I heard this very low vibration, sounding almost like a low roar. It was powerful enough to vibrate in my chest. Suddenly, everything in the forest shut up. No bugs, no birds, nothing. About 30 seconds later, my phone vibrates and it's my friend in the other tent texting me asking if I heard the same thing. The 4 of us kept texting each other, wondering what it was. About 10 minutes later, all the animals slowly started making noise again. I slept that night with my machete at arm's reach. When I was a kid, my family took a giant camper pop-up tent thing around Europe. We were stationed in Germany in the late 70s at the time, and our summer vacations were spent in the station wagon, hauling the camper and camping through different countries. There were always interesting things happening at campgrounds. One time we were almost flooded out by a flash flood rainstorm along the Loire Valley. Another time all of our shoes were filled with slugs, but the scary one was somewhere back in France. We were camping at some grounds that were on some really old property. Right in the middle of the campground, there was this really old abandoned chateau. It wasn't really that big, you could see in the windows, all the wallpaper was peeling off the walls. Some rooms that you could see into had ragged curtains and a few pieces of furniture. The doors were locked up with chains, and a no trespassing sign was on the front in French. My brother and sister and I were playing around the old place at dusk, peeking in the windows until we were called back to the tent for the night. There were probably 10 other campsites with people in it that night. Later that night, probably after 1 a.m., I had to pee really bad. I was old enough to be allowed to take my flashlight and walk to the bathroom by myself, so I quietly unzipped the tent and headed out with my flashlight. I had to go right by that creepy house. I skirted by the house as fast as possible. On my way back, I passed by the house and someone else was walking diagonal from me, and their flashlight reflected on one of the windows. I glanced over at the light, and there was a giant figure in the window, just behind the curtains that the light illuminated. It was thick and dark and had white eyes that blinked at me for a second. The person's flashlight moved over pretty fast, and within seconds, the figure was gone with the light. I never ran back to the tent so fast in my life. My mom said she heard me coming when she heard my flip-flops flapping like crazy back to the tent. I would only talk about it in the morning, when it was light again. This happened maybe 20 years ago, when 3 friends and I went camping at Kentucky Lake, well, technically, Lake Barkley. So we had just settled on a campsite after hiking maybe an hour from where we parked. It was on a small inlet, maybe 300 yards long and 150 yards to the opposite shore. We had it all to ourselves and camped near the U-bend of the inlet, so we had a limited view of the lake proper. We could see it to the left, but it was mostly blocked by the trees on the opposite side of the little bay. It being relatively hot and humid, we were all standing in the water after having set up our tents and such. The sun had gone down maybe an hour earlier, so there was still a little light left. I think it was early summer or late spring. So we're standing there shooting the breeze, up to our shoulders in the water. It felt great. Suddenly, above us, there was a meteor-like fireball that lasted maybe 2 seconds at most. It appeared to be very close, but there's no way to be certain. We saw it fall behind the opposite spit of land and, presumably, land in the lake. Immediately afterwards, the entire lake lit up, seemingly, from the bottom. Seriously, all the water visible from where we were standing, including our little inlet and the portion of the lake proper, lit up like the entire floor of the lake was made of spotlights. It flashed 2 or 3 times and went out. There was no accompanying sound whatsoever. A few seconds went by when one of the guys asks, "Okay, did anybody else see that?" Which was followed by an evening of us all theorizing what it could have been. To this day, none of us have any idea what it was, but we all saw it. It may not be as weird or terrifying as some of the other stories here, but it's easily the strangest thing I've ever seen.